Well, time now for my political panel, and I'm joined by New South Wales Liberal MP Jason Falinski and Victorian Labor MP Peter Murphy. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Hey,
nice to see you again.
Likewise. I look forward to the day we can all be, in Canberra again together. Peter Murphy, let's start with you. We've been talking a lot about the French ambassador finally returning to Canberra after he was recalled. Have you been surprised by this sort of French fury that's been unleashed since Australia tore up that submarine agreement?
I've been really disappointed with the way this has all played out. And when we have the Americans really needing to step in to try to mend relationships with the French, it shouldn't have come to this. And it's really clear that Scott Morrison has a lot of work to do with France and other European allies to mend relationships, because it would seem that he cancelled a contract via text message late at night. So I hope that this can be mended as soon as possible. Really, it's important.
Yeah, Jason Falinski, it's a good move that the French ambassador is returning to Canberra, but the French president isn't even taking phone calls from Scott Morrison right now.
Yes, as you can see, Jane, I have put my French flag behind me today. It's not because it's a leftover from my daughter's Year 6 project at all. I want you to understand that. But look, it's very important that I think there was a lot of politics going on the French side. There's a French presidential election towards the end of this year. Early next year, I should say. It was never going to go down well that we were cancelling a $90 billion project. But, in context, we have to work towards what is in Australia's best national interests. And I don't think there are many people who doubt that the change to the AUKUS arrangements is a better outcome for Australia and Australians.
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, putting aside the worthiness or otherwise of the deal and the AUKUS agreement, I mean, there's a pretty big difference here in Emmanuel Macron's approach to Australia versus his approach to the US President Joe Biden, who was kind of tied up in this AUKUS arrangement. He's taking Joe Biden's calls, and there's a full court press of American Biden administration figures going over to Paris to try and soothe tensions there. Jason Falinski, should we be doing the same?
Oh, well, you presume we're not doing the same. I mean, look, I think that plays well, once again, for French domestic politics. He gave Boris Johnson the cold shoulder shortly after this deal was announced. I mean, look, let's not kid ourselves. There were problems with the French contract. They've been well circulated publicly. We have to work in our national interest. The French president has to work in his best interest and that of the French nation. I mean, this is global politics, and we're seeing it played out. But at the end of the day, we're friends. Our interests are aligned both to Europe's and to France's, and that's where we'll end up on very good terms once again.
Well, we all hope so, I guess. Peter Murphy, what do you think about the government's argument that it was just acting in the national interest, that this was inevitable, this reaction by the French, and that the United States was offering up its tightly held nuclear technology to Australia, so the government just grabbed it with both hands?
Of course we have to act in Australia's national interest, but it's also in our interest to maintain good relationships with our allies, and particularly important allies in the European Union, and who have an important role to play in our area as well, in the Pacific. So it's not incompatible to act in the national interest with the AUKUS agreement, and also to handle the relationship with the French so much better than the Prime Minister seems to have handled it. We may have sent Dantin over to France, but I understand he's eating chocolate croissants on his own at the moment. As I said, there's a lot of work to be done to repair the way in which this was handled. We need to be a country that treats our allies with respect, because we want them to treat us with respect. It's a pretty fundamental way to behave.
All right, I want to move on to the Glasgow Climate Conference, because it's in about 3 weeks' time, Jason Falinski, and the government still does not have a policy on whether or not it's going to be committing to net zero by 2050. If you can sort of look into the future, will we be adopting that target before our officials head over to Glasgow?
Well, look, Jane, if I can just follow up the last answer that Peter gave by saying, I don't want to speak for her, but Dan, if you're in France and you're feeling lonely, just call out. Peter and I will come and join you.
We'll all come and join you. We all want to go to France or overseas. But putting that aside, 2050.
On 2050, look, we do have a policy around it. What you're looking for is a decision on whether Australia will move towards net zero by 2050. The government's working through considerably difficult issues. Australia is unique, frankly, globally, because we have a small population, we're a net exporter of energy, and we're a large producer of agricultural goods. So we need to, this is going to be more difficult for us than it will be for other nations.
But hang on, Jason Falinski, I mean, talking about a unique geography, I think we're unique because somehow in Australia, climate change policy has become part of the climate wars. It's an ideological crusade for some people. So, I mean, I think it's the politics really that are holding this up. Wouldn't you agree?
So, Jane, well, politics always holds us up, as you know. But I don't think we're unique to say that we are one of the few countries that are as involved in heated political debate about climate policy. I think that's that would be stretching it somewhat. But what we do have is we've reduced our emissions by 20%. Countries like New Zealand and Canada haven't done that. The United States isn't that far behind us, even though they're involved in climate wars, as you would describe it. So look, we have to work through this as best as we possibly can and ensure that wherever there are people who are getting left behind in this change of policy, that we have a package there that helps them transition. Where Australia is also unique, I would have to say, to be clear about this, is that we are one of the few nations that will benefit economically from a transition to net zero. We have virtually all the minerals, all the resources that are required to help the world transition to a net zero environment. So, I mean, people like me have been arguing we shouldn't see this as a cost. We should be seeing this as an opportunity. And the sooner we make that decision, the sooner we can start selling the upside of such a decision.
And just before I bring Peter Murphy in, because a lot of the focus is on what the government is going to be doing over the next 3 weeks, I mean, Jason Falinski, we know that a plan is being developed by Barnaby Joyce and Scott Morrison, and that will be presented to the Nationals party room. Obviously, the Liberals are hoping to get the Nats over the line. Don't you think as a voter it's pretty weird that the coalition MPs are saying we're waiting for a plan from our own government before we decide whether to sign up to a target in 3 weeks' time?
Well, I mean, but isn't that how Parliament works? Isn't that how government works? I mean, the executive
seems to be
coming
happening
up
at pretty warp speed.
Well, I understand that there are some people who wish that it had happened sooner. You may be, in fact, talking to one of them. But the important thing is that it gets done. The timing of it is not that important. The location of where that decision is not important. What is important is that we reach that destination. People like myself, and I'm sure Peter, are trying to do the best we can to make sure that we carry the country and people along with us as that transition's made and as that decision is made. And the sooner the better, as you would say.
All right, and Peter Murphy, of course, the Labor Party federally has committed to a net zero target by 2050. The government criticises you guys, though, because it says that you've committed to a target without a plan. When would we see a plan from the Labor Party about how, you know, a future Labor government would achieve this target?
Well, we've already announced a number of policies like rewiring the energy grid and solar batteries in suburbs, and an electric vehicle plan, which you might remember was also rubbished by Scott Morrison at the last election. And there will be, it's much more to come. Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese have made this clear. But I also just want to say, you know, Jason just did his best to put a positive spin on what is not just a diabolical situation, but such an embarrassing situation that our Prime Minister won't even go to Glasgow. It's no wonder he's too embarrassed to go to Glasgow. I mean, this is the Morrison-Joyce government. We should have had this government committing to net zero emissions by 2050 a long time ago. You know, when the BCA and every state and all the unions and big companies and the big banks and everyone has said this has to be done, and the states are leading the charge. And unfortunately, it's people like Matt Canavan and George Christensen who appear to have much more say over what the federal government's emissions reductions and climate change policy is than Jason Falinski, who's out here now pushing for net zero by 2050. You know, it's the minimum this government should be doing, and it should have done it a long time ago. And how can anyone have any faith of anything Scott Morrison is going to say in the next 3 weeks in the lead up to Glasgow, particularly when he's now walking away from even attending?
Well, Peter, if MPs like Jason Falinski get their way and the coalition does commit to a target of net zero by 2050, could that sort of signal the end of what has been the climate wars of the past decade in Australian politics? I mean, would it be nice to see some bipartisanship in this, pretty important policy area?
It would be terrific. It would be terrific if the climate wars had never started. I mean, sure, we'll be excited if and when all the members of the federal government come on board to first acknowledge climate change is real and say that it is something that we have to do, not just for the climate, but for the economy and for jobs. But is it going to happen? And how much credit do you give a Prime Minister who's one of the people that was dragging the chain for so many years, waving around lumps of coal, that he finally gets to the minimum position that we should have been at a long time ago? But look, let's get there, and then let's talk about...
Oh no, I think we've had a technical problem there. I think we've just lost Peter Murphy. But look, I'll just wrap at that point anyway because we're running out of time. But thanks very much there to Labor MP Peter Murphy and Liberal MP Jason Falinski. Apologies for that